At 03:47 hours on March 22, 2024, Captain Mason Reed knew he was going to die. Pinned down in a rocky depression in northern Syria, his six-man SEAL Team 7 was 90 seconds away from being overrun. Surrounded, outgunned, and cut off from extraction, Reed watched as his remaining ammunition dwindled with each controlled burst from his Mk-18 CQBR carbine. "Sit rep," he whispered into his throat mic voice, steady, despite the dire circumstances. The calm in his voice was practiced, a deliberate choice meant to steady his men, rather than a reflection of the cold knot tightening in his stomach. "4 mags left on primary 2 for sidearm," replied Ryan Carter, the team's communications specialist. His voice carried the clipped precision of a man conserving breath and energy for the fight ahead. "Comms still jammed on all standard frequencies. No contact with TOC or air support." Master Chief Marcus Gray, the oldest member of the team at 48, pressed his back against the jagged rock formation, providing their meager cover. Sweat and dust caked his weathered face, mapping the lines earned through 20 years of special operations. Enemy closing from the north and east. Multiple firing positions on the ridgeline. Gray reported, his voice carrying the weight of dozens of similar situations. But his eyes told Reed what went unsaid: they'd never faced odds quite this bad. They're being smart, moving in coordinated elements. On the opposite side of their position, Petty Officer Eric Daniels worked feverishly over the prone form of Petty Officer Wilson, applying pressure to a gunshot wound that had narrowly missed the femoral artery. "Wilson's stable, but we can't move him far." Daniels reported, his medical bag nearly empty after treating 3 other wounds among the team. "We need extract in the next 10 minutes, or he's at risk for shock." Reed nodded, taking in the tactical reality with the cold calculation his position demanded. 6 elite warriors nearly out of ammunition, communications compromised, wounded teammate, no extraction, and an enemy force of at least 40 closing in with practiced precision. This wasn't a desperate situation, it was the final chapter. His mind flashed back to Fallujah 2007. A similar situation where his unit had been pinned down by insurgent fire, surrounded and cut off. But they'd had air support, then called in by a forward observer who'd sacrificed his position to relay coordinates. The thunder of 500-pound bombs had flattened the enemy positions, the percussive force feeling like salvation itself. No such salvation awaited them here. Whoever had set this trap had planned too well. "Unknown shooter, identify yourself," a voice called out in accented English from somewhere above their position. "Surrender your weapons, and you will be treated according to the laws of war." Reed exchanged glances with Gray, both men recognizing the lie. Elite operators captured in this region faced only torture execution and propaganda videos. A SEAL team would represent a particularly valuable prize. "All stations, this is Phoenix Actual," Reed transmitted, using their team call sign rather than his name. "Prepare for final defensive posture. We hold here. No surrender, no quarter." The acknowledgments came back instantly, without question or hesitation. Each man checked his remaining ammunition and grenades, shifting positions to maximize their fields of fire. They would take as many of the enemy with them as possible, denying them an easy victory or undamaged prisoners for propaganda. Reed thumbed the selector switch on his carbine, setting it to semi-automatic to conserve ammunition. Through his night vision, he could see shadows moving between rocks on the opposite slope. Careful, disciplined movements, rather than the chaotic rushing he'd seen from less experienced fighters. Whoever had set this trap knew how SEALs operated. They'd fed false intelligence about a high-value asset requiring extraction, placed the target in terrain that funneled them into this kill box, and cut off their communications at precisely the right moment. This wasn't just a good ambush. It was an ambush specifically designed for an American Special Operations team. Carter tapped Reed's shoulder, pointing to the eastern approach. They're setting up for coordinated assault. Multiple teams with overlapping fields of fire. 30 seconds, maybe less. Reed drew his sidearm with his left hand, keeping his carbine ready in his right. "God bless the United States of America," he said quietly into his comm. "It's been an honor serving with you gentlemen." The first enemy fighter appeared on the ridgeline silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Reed sighted in, exhaled half a breath, and prepared to squeeze the trigger. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the valley, but it hadn't come from Reed's position or from any of the enemy positions they'd identified. The silhouetted fighter collapsed instantly. A second shot, then a third, each followed by confused shouts from the enemy positions above them. The incoming fire that had kept them pinned down suddenly ceased, replaced by the chaos of voices calling out in panic. "What the hell?" Daniels whispered, looking up from Wilson's bandaged leg. Through his night vision goggles, Reed tracked muzzle flashes from a position that hadn't existed moments earlier. But these weren't incoming. These shots were systematically eliminating the enemy forces that had surrounded them. "Phoenix. Actual, this is Sentinel. Stay in position. Extraction inbound in 7 minutes." The voice in their secure communications channel was female American and carried the calm confidence of someone who had complete control of a chaotic battlefield. But no American forces were supposed to be operating in their area, and their communications had been encrypted with codes that only their immediate command had access to. "Identify yourself and authenticate," Reed demanded military protocol, overriding his relief at the unexpected assistance. "Authentication not available through this channel," the voice replied without missing a beat. "Your mission was compromised before you left Virginia Beach. This ambush was pre-planned." Before Reed could respond, a small package landed with pinpoint accuracy in the center of their defensive position. Gray covered it instantly, prepared for a grenade, but the package was clearly American-made, a tactical resupply pod. Inside were fresh magazines that exactly matched their weapons medical supplies, that precisely fit Daniel's needs, and communication equipment that looked more advanced than anything in their current inventory. "Tango down Northwest Ridge," the female voice Sentinel reported through their secured channel. "Moving to secondary targets. Enemy command element identified and neutralized." Reed watched in stunned silence as the tactical situation transformed around them. The mysterious woman wasn't just shooting targets randomly, she was systematically dismantling the enemy's entire command structure, communication networks, and fire teams with surgical precision. "Phoenix, she's not transmitting from any known friendly position," Carter reported, examining his communications equipment with professional intensity. "Signal strength suggests she's mobile, but I can't get a fix on her location." Gray loaded the fresh magazines, his experienced eyes widening slightly as he examined the ammunition. "These aren't standard issue. Custom loads optimized for this environment, reduced signature stabilized for the current humidity and temperature." The battlefield dynamics shifted with supernatural speed as their unknown guardian continued eliminating enemy positions. Each shot seemed to serve multiple purposes, eliminating immediate threats, while disrupting coordination between remaining enemies, creating confusion that prevented organized responses. "Unknown friendly. Sentinel," Reed transmitted, correcting himself, "request identification for after-action report." The response carried hints of amusement. "Official identification can wait until you're safely extracted. Focus on preparing your wounded for transport. Chopper inbound." As dawn illuminated the Syrian mountains, Reed began to understand the scope of their mysterious allies' capabilities. She had positioned herself with perfect fields of fire covering multiple approaches, anticipated enemy movements before they occurred, and systematically eliminated threats in an order that maximized tactical advantage. "She's reading the entire battlefield like a book," Gray whispered, the veteran SEAL watching through his scope as muzzle flashes appeared from positions that provided perfect angles on approaching enemies. "I've never seen anything like it, not even in Delta or CAG." More improbably, she seemed to be providing intelligence that exceeded anything in their mission briefing. "Incoming mortar team from your southeast distance 800 meters. Eliminating now." Reed watched through his scope as a muzzle flash appeared briefly, followed by the distant sound of a precision shot. Seconds later, the distinct thump of a mortar tube hitting the ground echoed across the valley. "How long have you been tracking this operation?" Reed asked during a brief lull. "Long enough to know you were walking into a trap," Sentinel replied. "Your mission intelligence was compromised. The asset you were sent to extract doesn't exist. This was a prepared kill zone designed specifically for your team." The implications hit the SEALs like cold water. Someone with access to their operational planning had deliberately fed them false information. This wasn't just an ambush, it was betrayal by their own support systems. "If our intelligence was compromised, how many other teams are walking into similar traps?" Daniels voiced what they were all thinking. Before Sentinel could respond, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the valley. But instead of relief, Carter's equipment identified a new threat. "Two Mi-24 Hinds inbound armed with anti-personnel rockets," he reported, voice tight with renewed tension. "Not friendly." Reed felt his stomach drop. Against attack helicopters, their small arms were virtually useless. "Sentinel, we need immediate extraction or air support. We cannot engage helicopter gunships with current equipment." "Understood." Adjusting tactical priorities. What happened next would be discussed in classified debriefings for months afterward. Instead of attempting to engage the helicopters directly, Sentinel began systematically eliminating ground-based elements the aircraft relied on for coordination, forward observers providing targeting information, communication relays directing the air attack, and fuel supplies staged for extended operations. The first helicopter pilot, suddenly cut off from ground coordination, began flying erratic patterns as he tried to re-establish contact. The second aircraft, lacking precise targeting information, circled the area without engaging, unwilling to risk friendly fire against his own ground forces. "Phoenix, marking your extraction point with green smoke. Friendly aviation inbound in 90 seconds. Reed hadn't requested extraction support, and their communications with base had been cut off for hours. How had she coordinated air support that his team couldn't access? The answer came in the form of two AH-64 Apache attack helicopters that appeared over the ridgeline with precise timing. The American aircraft immediately engaged the enemy helicopters with overwhelming firepower, ending the air threat within minutes. As a UH-60 Blackhawk landed at the designated extraction point, Reed gathered his team for movement. "Sentinel, request meetup for extraction. You've earned a ride home." The response was barely audible over the helicopter noise. "Negative. Different mission parameters. Stay safe, Phoenix." As they boarded the Blackhawk, Reed caught a glimpse of movement on a distant ridge, a lone figure watching their extraction before disappearing into terrain that had hidden fighters for generations. During the flight back to base, Carter worked frantically to analyze the communication equipment Sentinel had provided. "Captain, this gear is at least 5 years ahead of anything we've been issued. The encryption protocols aren't in any military database I can access." Gray studied the ammunition they'd been resupplied with during the engagement. "Custom loads, optimized for extreme accuracy and reduced noise signatures. Whoever she is, she's got access to equipment that doesn't officially exist." Reed stared out the helicopter window at the Syrian mountains receding in the distance, his mind racing with questions. If Sentinel could access their encrypted communications coordinate air support that their own command structure couldn't provide and eliminate an enemy force that had trapped 6 of America's most elite warriors, who was she really working for? More importantly, why had she been in position to save them unless she'd known about the trap in advance? 12 hours after their extraction from Syria, Reed found himself sitting in a sterile debriefing room at Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, facing questions that had no satisfactory answers. Captain Lawrence Warren, their commanding officer, had flown in from Virginia Beach specifically for this session, accompanied by Major Eleanor Reeves from Naval Intelligence. But it was the third person in the room who commanded Reed's attention, Colonel James "Iron" Fletcher, a legendary figure within special operations circles. At 70, Fletcher should have been long retired, but his piercing blue eyes carried the same intensity they had during his days commanding Delta Force operations throughout the Cold War. Now serving as a special advisor to the Department of Defense, Fletcher's presence at a SEAL debriefing was unprecedented. "Let me understand this correctly," Captain Warren said, consulting his notes with obvious frustration. "An unknown individual with access to your encrypted communications, advanced military equipment, and apparent coordination with air assets that we have no record of deploying single-handedly eliminated approximately 40 enemy combatants and extracted your team from what you describe as certain death." Reed nodded, knowing how impossible it sounded. "Yes, sir. That's an accurate summary." Major Reeves leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "And this individual identified herself only as Sentinel and provided no military identification unit designation or authorization codes." "Correct, ma'am. She appeared to have detailed knowledge of our mission parameters and enemy capabilities that exceeded our own intelligence briefings." The debriefing room fell silent as Warren and Reeves exchanged glances that suggested private conversations had already taken place about this incident. Carter, Gray, and Daniels sat around the conference table, each man studying the advanced equipment they'd brought back. "About this equipment," Reeves continued, gesturing toward the communication gear and ammunition samples. "Our technical analysis indicates manufacturing standards and capabilities that aren't consistent with any known military contractor or research facility." Gray spoke up from the far end of the table. "Ma'am, with respect, that equipment saved our lives. Whatever its origin, it performed flawlessly under extreme conditions." "I'm not questioning its effectiveness, Chief," Reeves replied. "I'm questioning how someone operating independently gained access to technology that officially doesn't exist, and why she was in position to intervene in your mission unless she had advanced knowledge of your operational plans." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. If Sentinel had known about their mission beforehand, it suggested either breach of operational security or connections to intelligence systems that she shouldn't have been able to access. Reed found himself defending someone he'd never met. "Major, regardless of how she obtained her information, her intervention prevented the loss of a 6-man SEAL team. Her actions were consistent with supporting American forces, not compromising them." "Were they?" Reeves opened a classified folder and spread several photographs across the table. "These are satellite images of your operational area taken 6 hours before your insertion. Notice anything unusual?" The team studied the images carefully. Carter was the first to spot the discrepancy. "There's a vehicle here that wasn't in our pre-mission intelligence photos. And these positions, someone had prepared overwatch locations that would provide perfect fields of fire over our planned route." "Exactly," Reeves confirmed. "Someone with access to your mission planning had pre-positioned assets in that area. Either Sentinel was part of the trap that nearly killed you, or she was conducting unauthorized surveillance of American special operations." Daniels looked up from examining one of the photographs. Ma'am, if she was part of the trap, why would she risk exposing herself to save us? It would have been easier to let the ambush succeed. Unless, Reeves continued, saving you served a larger purpose that we don't yet understand. Throughout the exchange, Colonel Fletcher had remained silent, his weathered face impossible to read. Now he cleared his throat immediately, drawing everyone's attention. "Captain Reed," he said, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of age and authority. "In your professional assessment, was Sentinel hostile friendly, or something else entirely?" Reed considered the question carefully. "Sir, her actions were consistently directed towards saving American lives and eliminating threats to my team. If I were classifying an unknown asset based solely on observed behavior, I would designate her as friendly." Fletcher nodded slightly, his eyes flickering toward Major Reeves with what might have been a hint of satisfaction. "And the tactical precision she displayed, your report mentioned systematic elimination of command elements and communication nodes. Would you characterize that as standard special operations procedure?" "No, sir," Reed replied. "Her target prioritization exceeded standard operating procedure. She wasn't just shooting enemies, she was dismantling their entire operational structure in a specific sequence that maximized disruptive effect. Almost as if she could see the entire battlefield at once," Fletcher mused, his gaze distant, "including elements that should have been invisible from any single observation point." Captain Warren took control of the briefing again. "Here's what we know for certain. Your mission intelligence was compromised. The asset you were sent to extract either never existed or was used as bait to draw you into a prepared kill zone. Someone wanted that SEAL team eliminated, and they used our own operational planning to make it happen." Reed felt his stomach tighten. "Sir, are you suggesting this was an inside job?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Captain," Warren replied. "I'm stating facts. Your mission briefing contained information that was later used against you by hostile forces. Either we have a security breach in our operational planning, or we have personnel deliberately sabotaging SEAL operations." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Military operations depended on trusted intelligence and secure communications. If either system was compromised, every mission became a potential death trap for American forces. Major Reeves continued her analysis. "What makes this particularly concerning is that similar incidents have been reported by other special operations units over the past 6 months, teams receiving intelligence that leads them into prepared ambushes only to be extracted by unknown individuals with capabilities that exceed conventional military resources." Carter sat up straighter. "Other teams have encountered Sentinel. We don't know," Reeves admitted. "The individual or individuals involved never provide identification, and they disappear immediately after successful extractions. But the pattern is consistent: compromised missions, trapped American forces, and rescue by someone with access to equipment and intelligence that officially doesn't exist." Gray's experience in special operations made him ask the critical question. "Ma'am, what's the common thread between these compromised missions? Same intelligence sources, same operational commanders, same support elements." Reeves exchanged another meaningful glance with Captain Warren before answering. "That's what we're trying to determine, but preliminary analysis suggests the compromises occur at levels that would require significant security clearances and access to multiple operational databases." Reed realized they were discussing potential treason by senior military or intelligence officials. "So whoever is setting up these ambushes has access to our most sensitive operational planning." "That appears to be the case," Reeves confirmed. And whoever is conducting these extractions has access to resources that suggest connections to classified military programs or foreign intelligence services with sophisticated capabilities. The briefing continued for another hour, covering technical details of the equipment Sentinel had provided, analysis of her tactical methods, and speculation about her possible identity and affiliations. But no clear answers emerged, only a growing sense that they'd become involved in something far more complex than a simple rescue operation. As the session concluded, Captain Warren addressed the team directly. "Everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest levels. You will not discuss these incidents with personnel outside your immediate team, and you will report any attempts at unauthorized contact regarding this mission immediately." "Sir," Reed asked, "what happens if we encounter Sentinel again?" Warren's expression was grim. "You follow standard procedures for unidentified personnel in operational areas, challenge for identification, and if none is provided, treat the contact as potentially hostile until proven otherwise." "Even if she's saving American lives?" Daniels asked. "Especially then," Major Reeves interjected. "Someone with her capabilities who operates outside official channels represents either a significant security breach or a foreign intelligence operation designed to gain our trust before exploiting it." As the others filed out of the briefing room, Colonel Fletcher motioned for Reed to stay behind. Once they were alone, the older man's demeanor changed subtly, the official reserve giving way to something more personal. "Walk with me, Captain," Fletcher said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. They made their way through the secure corridors of the joint base, neither speaking until they reached an outdoor courtyard where the spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the nearby Potomac. "What I'm about to tell you isn't in any official record," Fletcher began, his voice lowered despite the empty courtyard. "This isn't the first time an asset like Sentinel has appeared during compromised operations." Reed felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. "Sirs," Fletcher's eyes scanned the perimeter before continuing. "Berlin, 1985. I was running a Delta team extracting a scientist who wanted to defect. Mission parameters were perfect, too perfect, as it turned out. We walked into an ambush that had been prepared with inside knowledge of our operational plan." "What happened?" Reed asked, recognizing the parallel to his own experience. "We were saved by an operator who shouldn't have existed," Fletcher replied, his gaze distant with memory. "A ghost who knew our communications frequencies, our extraction protocols, and the enemy's disposition better than we did. Sound familiar?" Reed nodded, understanding flowing between them. "Did you ever identify them?" "No," Fletcher admitted. "But it wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the Cold War, there were rumors of guardian angels watching over special operations teams, phantoms who appeared when missions went sideways, especially missions that showed signs of internal compromise. You think Sentinel is connected to these Cold War guardians?" Fletcher's weathered face betrayed nothing. "What I think, Captain, is that there are elements within our own government that have been compromising special operations for decades, and there are other elements working outside official channels to protect those operations. The question is, which side serves America's interests better?" Reed processed this, the implications staggering. "Sir, with respect, why are you telling me this?" "Because Sentinel contacted your team specifically," Fletcher replied. "And in my experience, that means she saw something in you worth saving beyond just 6 American lives. I think you'll hear from her again." "Captain Warren ordered us to report any contact immediately," Reed pointed out. Fletcher's expression hardened. "Warren is a good officer, but he's part of a chain of command that may be compromised at levels neither of you can see. Sometimes protecting your country means making difficult choices about who to trust." Before Reed could respond, Fletcher handed him a small device that resembled an outdated pager. "If Sentinel contacts you again, I want to know. Not through official channels, through this. It's a secure communication system from the Cold War analog, not digital. Can't be hacked because it's not connected to any network." Reed stared at the device, understanding the line he was being asked to cross. "Sir, it sounds like an old man being paranoid," Fletcher interrupted with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Consider it a professional courtesy to humor me. After all, my generation spent decades watching for enemies inside our own institutions. Old habits die hard." As Reed pocketed the device, Fletcher placed a hand on his shoulder. "One last thing, Captain. The most important question isn't who Sentinel is or how she knew about your mission. The most important question is why someone wanted your team eliminated badly enough to compromise high-level intelligence to make it happen." With that parting thought, Fletcher walked away, leaving Reed alone with questions that threatened everything he believed about the institutions he'd sworn to serve. 3 weeks after their Syrian extraction, Reed was conducting advanced marksmanship training at the Naval Special Warfare Shooting Facility in Virginia Beach. The isolated range allowed for long-distance precision work, away from the main compound, giving him space to process the lingering questions from their last deployment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the firing range as Reed adjusted the scope on his Mk-13 sniper rifle. The familiar routine of checking wind conditions, calculating bullet drop, and controlling his breathing provided a welcome focus after weeks of debriefings and uncertainty. As he prepared to fire, a voice he recognized spoke through his earpiece. "Your elevation calculations are off by 2 minutes of angle. Wind speed has shifted since your last measurement." Reed immediately froze, recognizing Sentinel's voice. He scanned the area around the shooting range, looking for any sign of an observer. The facility was secure, surrounded by multiple layers of security that should have prevented unauthorized access. "Sentinel," he transmitted, keeping his voice level despite his surprise. "You're on a restricted military facility. Focus on your shooting fundamentals, Captain," she replied, ignoring his implied question. "You're anticipating recoil on your long shots. It's affecting your follow-through." Reed considered alerting security but found himself hesitating. Instead, he made the adjustment Sentinel had suggested and squeezed the trigger. The shot struck dead center on the target 800 yards downrange. "Better," she commented. "Now adjust your breathing rhythm. You're holding too long before firing." For the next hour, Sentinel provided instruction that transformed his marksmanship. She didn't just correct his mistakes, she explained underlying principles that most military snipers never fully understood. Wind-reading techniques that accounted for terrain features miles from the target. Atmospheric pressure calculations that considered altitude variations across bullet trajectory paths. "Why are you teaching me this?" Reed finally asked during a pause to change targets. "Because the next time you walk into a trap, I might not be in position to extract you," Sentinel replied. "You need to recognize threats that come from inside your own support systems." Reed lowered his rifle, her words striking deeper than she knew. "Colonel Fletcher said something similar." A brief pause followed. "James Fletcher, Delta Force, Berlin Station Chief, 1983 to 1987, one of the few who recognized the internal threat and lived to retirement." The specificity of her knowledge confirmed Fletcher's account. "You know him?" "I know of him," she corrected. "He's one of the good ones. Old school. Understands that loyalty to the Constitution sometimes means questioning the chain of command." Reed made a decision, setting his rifle aside. "I need to understand what's happening. Who are you? How did you know our mission in Syria was compromised?" "Those are dangerous questions, Captain," Sentinel replied, her tone shifting slightly. The kind that got better men than you eliminated. I nearly lost my entire team because someone fed us bad intelligence, Reed countered. I think I've earned some answers. The communication line went silent for so long that Reed thought she might have disappeared. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried new weight. My name was Lieutenant Catherine Hayes, Naval Intelligence. I discovered a pattern of compromised special operations missions 3 years ago while analyzing after-action reports that didn't add up. When I reported my findings through official channels, I was diagnosed with stress-induced paranoia and discharged. A month later, someone tried to make that discharge permanent. I've been operating independently since then. Reed absorbed this, connecting dots with what Fletcher had told him. You've been monitoring our communications. I monitor all special operations communications in certain regions, she corrected, particularly missions that show patterns consistent with previous compromises. That's highly illegal, Reed pointed out, though without particular heat. So is using American Special Operations Forces as sacrificial pawns to advance private interests, Hayes replied. We all make choices about which laws matter most. Reed considered his next question carefully. The equipment you provided in Syria, it's not standard issue, not even for classified programs. Some of it was developed for DARPA projects that never officially existed, she explained. Some comes from private sources who share my concerns about compromised operations. And the air support, the Apaches. Hayes paused before answering. There are still good people in the system, Captain. People who respond when American forces need help, even without official authorization. Reed felt the ground shifting beneath his conception of military order. How many operations have been compromised? At least 73 over the past 3 years across all branches, Hayes replied without hesitation, resulting in 42 American casualties that I've confirmed. The actual number is likely higher. Waitata, Reed asked the single word encompassing the enormity of the betrayal. Why would anyone within our own system set up American forces to die? That's the question that matters. Hayes said, approval evident in her voice. And the answer isn't simple. Sometimes it's money. Private military contractors benefit from continued instability in certain regions. Sometimes it's influence. Compromised officials trading operational intelligence to foreign powers. Sometimes it's policy elements within the government eliminating inconvenient witnesses or creating justifications for expanded military presence. Reed tried to process the scope of what she was describing. If you have evidence of this, why not take it to Congress? The media, with what proof? Hayes challenged. Digital evidence can be discredited, witnesses eliminated or discredited as paranoid, and whistleblowers prosecuted. I need irrefutable evidence that can't be buried or explained away. Reed felt the weight of Fletcher's warning pressing on him. Like first-hand testimony from a SEAL team commander about a compromised operation. Exactly like that, Hayes confirmed, but only if that commander makes the choice freely, understanding the risks. Reed understood now why Sentinel Hayes had intervened in Syria, not just to save 6 Americans, but to create witnesses who could corroborate what she'd discovered. Your next mission is being prepared now, Hayes said, changing the subject abruptly. Protective detail for a diplomatic convoy in Jordan next month. The intelligence will look perfect. The authorization will come through proper channels, and it will be another trap. Reed felt ice water in his veins. How do you know this? Because I recognize the pattern, Hayes replied. The same signatures I've seen in dozens of compromised operations. They're getting more careful, but the fundamentals don't change. What's the real purpose of the mission? Reed asked, already dreading the answer. The diplomats you'll be protecting are actually contractors for Titan Defense Industries. They're using diplomatic cover to transfer weapons to extremist groups who will use them against Turkish forces, creating regional instability that justifies expanded American military presence and billions in defense contracts. Reed struggled to accept the magnitude of what she was describing. American Special Operations Forces being used to facilitate illegal weapons sales that would ultimately destabilize a NATO ally. "I need to report this," he said, military protocol warring with the warnings from both Hayes and Fletcher. "To whom?" Hayes asked simply. "The same chain of command that set up your ambush in Syria. How high do you think this goes, Captain?" Before Reed could answer, Hayes continued, "Here's what will happen if you report this through official channels. Your concerns will be noted, you'll be thanked for your vigilance, and the mission will proceed exactly as planned. If you push too hard, you'll find yourself sidelined for psychological evaluation just before the mission. Your team will deploy under different leadership walk into another trap, and if they're lucky, I'll be there to extract them." Reed ran a hand over his face, feeling the walls of his ordered military world crumbling. "What's the alternative?" "Deploy as ordered," Hayes said. "But carry additional equipment that will allow you to document everything. Record the weapons transfers, the contractors' identities, the coordinates of the deliveries. Gather evidence that can't be explained away or buried in classification. And then you make a choice," Hayes replied, "about whether the oath you took to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, means what you thought it meant." Reed stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher over the Virginia coastline. Everything in his training told him to report this conversation immediately. Everything in his instinct told him Hayes was telling the truth. "I need to think about this," he finally said. "That's fair," Hayes acknowledged. "But don't take too long. The convoy mission is scheduled for April 18th. Preparation briefings begin next week." Reed nodded, then realized she might not be able to see him. "How do I contact you if I decide to investigate further?" "You already have the means," Hayes replied. "Colonel Fletcher's device. Cold War technology has its advantages. No digital footprint, no network vulnerability. Old school, like the man himself." Before Reed could ask how she knew about Fletcher's device, the communication channel went silent. He stood alone on the firing range, the weight of impossible choices bearing down on him like physical pressure. As he packed up his equipment, Reed found himself remembering the oath he'd taken when he commissioned to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. At the time, the domestic part had seemed like a historical formality, a relic from the founding era. Now he understood it was anything but. For 3 days following his encounter with Hayes at the shooting range, Captain Mason Reed struggled with the impossible choice before him. Each path seemed fraught with danger. Report the contact and risk betraying someone genuinely trying to protect American forces, or withhold information and violate every protocol drilled into him through 15 years of military service. The weight of the decision kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his Virginia Beach apartment as fragments of his conversation with Hayes played on endless loop. 73 compromised operations. 42 confirmed American casualties. Special operations teams betrayed by their own command structure. It seemed inconceivable. Yet the memory of Syria remained etched in his mind with perfect clarity. The precise preparation of the ambush, the detailed knowledge of SEAL tactics, the systematic way they'd been funneled into a kill zone. That hadn't been luck or coincidence. Someone had wanted them dead and had access to their operational planning. On the 4th morning, Reed made his decision. The small device Fletcher had given him felt strangely heavy in his palm as he activated it according to the colonel's instructions. The analog technology was primitive by modern standards. No touch screen, no geo-GPS, no connectivity to any digital network, but its very simplicity was its strength. It couldn't be tracked, couldn't be hacked, couldn't be monitored by conventional means. "I need to meet," Reed typed the device's small physical buttons, clicking under his fingers. "Face to face." The response came faster than he expected, appearing on the small monochrome display within minutes. "Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, 1400 hours. Come alone." Reed recognized the significance immediately. Section 60, where many of the casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan were buried. It was both a secure meeting location and a pointed reminder of the stakes involved. At precisely 1400 hours, Reed stood among the ordered rows of white marble headstones, the April sun casting long shadows across manicured grounds. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a windbreaker over a plain t-shirt, and had taken precautions to ensure he wasn't followed switching cars twice and approaching the cemetery on foot from an unexpected direction. "You weren't followed." The voice came from behind him, and Reed turned to find Colonel Fletcher approaching along a row of graves, his pace unhurried but purposeful. Despite his 70 years, the former Delta commander moved with the fluid economy of a man who had spent his life in dangerous places. He wore a dark overcoat despite the mild weather, and Reed suspected it concealed both a sidearm and counter-surveillance equipment. "How can you be sure?" Reed asked. Fletcher's weathered face creased in a humorless smile. "Because we've been watching you since you entered the metro station. Old habits die hard." Reed glanced around but saw no one else nearby. "Figure of speech," Fletcher replied dismissively. "Walk with me." They moved deeper into Section 60, past the graves of men and women who had died in the conflicts that had defined the early 21st century. Fletcher occasionally paused to read a name or touch a headstone, a ritual of respect that seemed deeply ingrained. "I heard from our mutual friend," Fletcher said, finally his voice lowered despite the open space. "She says you have questions." "More than I can count," Reed admitted, "starting with how deep this goes and how I can verify what she's telling me." Fletcher nodded, apparently satisfied with Reed's caution. "Trust, but verify." "Good. Follow me." He led Reed to a small maintenance building at the cemetery's edge. Inside, rather than groundskeeping equipment, Reed found a small room with dated but functional surveillance and communication equipment. A gray-haired man sat at a console monitoring several screens. He nodded to Fletcher, but didn't acknowledge Reed. "Meet Thomas," Fletcher said, "former NSA cryptanalyst, retired officially in 1991, though he kept working on special projects until 2009. Thomas grunted without looking up from his screens. "Got tired of watching the system rot from the inside. Now I just watch it from the outside." Fletcher gestured to the equipment. Cold War era with some upgrades. Analog systems with physical security measures. Can't be accessed remotely. "What exactly am I looking at?" Reed asked, studying screens displaying what appeared to be intercepted communications and surveillance footage. "Evidence," Fletcher replied simply. "Thomas has been monitoring certain communication channels and cross-referencing them with special operations deployments for the past 4 years. The pattern became clear once we knew what to look for." He pointed to one screen showing a timeline of operations. "These are missions that match the compromise pattern Hayes identified. Notice anything about the geographical distribution?" Reed studied the data, his military training allowing him to quickly identify the pattern. They're concentrated in regions with ongoing weapons sales and military contracts. Jordan, northern Syria, eastern Turkey, Yemen. "Exactly," Fletcher confirmed. "Now, look at this." He pointed to another screen showing financial transactions. These are payments from Titan Defense Industries to various offshore accounts. Notice how they spike immediately after incidents in these same regions. Reed leaned closer, his stomach tightening as he recognized dates that corresponded with known attacks on U.S. forces and local allies. They're profiting from the chaos. It's a business model, Fletcher said grimly. Create instability profit from the military response required to contain it, then create more instability to ensure continued contracts. Weapons sales logistical support, private security services, reconstruction contracts, a perpetual profit machine fueled by American blood. Thomas tapped a few keys, bringing up personnel files on another screen. The key was identifying who had access to operational planning for each compromised mission. The overlap gives us our primary suspects. Reed felt his blood run cold as he recognized several of the names senior officers and intelligence officials he'd worked with and respected. These are some of our highest-ranking commanders. The perfect position to exploit, Fletcher agreed. They approve missions, access intelligence, and coordinate with contractors. Who would question their authority or suspect their motives? The Jordan convoy, Reed said, connecting the pieces. Hayes said it's a weapons transfer disguised as a diplomatic mission. Fletcher nodded. Titan's specialty. They've been running similar operations for years, using American military protection to move weapons that later end up in the hands of groups who create precisely the kind of regional instability that justifies expanded military presence. Reed struggled to process the scale of the corruption. How does no one notice this? People notice, Fletcher said darkly. They just tend to have unfortunate accidents or sudden psychiatric issues before they can report their findings. Thomas grunted in agreement. 3 whistleblowers in the last 2 years. 1 suicide with suspicious circumstances, 1 committed to psychiatric care after a breakdown, and 1 killed in a single-vehicle accident on a straight road in good weather. Reed thought of Hayes discharged for stress-induced paranoia before someone tried to permanently silence her. And Hayes, smarter than most, Fletcher acknowledged. She went underground before they could eliminate her using her intelligence training to stay ahead of them. Been monitoring and intervening in compromised operations ever since. Why don't you take this evidence to Congress or the Joint Chiefs? Reed asked, gesturing to the screens. This is treason at the highest levels. Fletcher's expression hardened. We tried, 2 years ago. The congressional aide we contacted was found dead 3 days later, another suicide. The evidence we provided disappeared from secured systems. That's when we realized how high this goes and how many systems are compromised. What we need, Thomas added, without looking up from his screens, is irrefutable evidence and testimony from active duty personnel that can't be disappeared or discredited. Evidence gathered during an actual operation documenting actual crimes in progress. Reed understood the implication. The Jordan mission. Fletcher nodded. If you choose to accept your assignment, we can provide you with equipment to document everything, the weapons transfers, the contractors' identities, the intended recipients. Evidence that can't be classified away, or explained as misunderstanding. And if I refuse? Reed asked, though he already knew the answer. Then your team deploys under orders, walks into another potential trap, and we try to ensure Hayes is in position to extract them if necessary. Fletcher said without judgment. Your choice, Captain. No pressure, no obligation. Reed stared at the screens at the evidence of systematic betrayal that had cost American lives. His training demanded he report this immediately through proper channels. His instinct told him Fletcher and Hayes were right. The proper channels were precisely the problem. "If I do this," Reed said slowly, "I need assurances my team will be protected afterward. These people don't hesitate to eliminate threats." "We've established secure protocols for whistleblower protection," Fletcher assured him. "Congressional allies' media contacts secure facilities, a modern underground railroad for those who expose corruption at this level." Reed took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling like armor across his shoulders. "I'll need specialized equipment, things that can't be detected in standard gear checks." Fletcher smiled for the first time, a thin expression that spoke of decades fighting shadows. "We were hoping you'd say that. Come with me." In a small back room, Fletcher revealed a collection of surveillance equipment that balanced old-school reliability with cutting-edge capability. Most of this was developed for intelligence operations during the Cold War, then modernized by private engineers who share our concerns. And he handed Reed what appeared to be standard tactical gear, body armor inserts, communication earpieces, medical supplies, each subtly modified to include recording capabilities and secure transmission systems. "These operate on frequencies and protocols that aren't monitored by current military systems," Fletcher explained. "They'll record everything you see and hear, transmitting to secure servers that can't be accessed or erased remotely." Thomas appeared in the doorway. "I've prepared documentation packages for each of your team members. Background on Titan Industries, previous weapons transfers, financial connections to known extremist groups. Let them make informed decisions about participation." Reed studied the equipment, considering the risks to his career, his freedom, and potentially his life. "I'll need to brief my team. I won't order them to participate in something this dangerous without full disclosure." "Of course," Fletcher agreed. "Operational security is paramount, but informed consent is non-negotiable. Brief them somewhere secure, no electronic devices, no possibility of surveillance." Reed nodded mentally, reviewing his team members and their likely reactions. Gray would understand immediately. The veteran chief had seen enough in his career to recognize corruption when confronted with it. Carter might be more hesitant, his faith in the system still relatively intact, despite Syria. Daniels would follow Reed's lead, trusting his judgment from years of operations together. "One more thing," Fletcher said, handing Reed a small case, from Hayes. Inside was a set of custom-loaded ammunition identical to what they'd received in Syria, along with a handwritten note for when things go sideways. They always do. The preparations for the Jordan mission proceeded exactly as Hayes had predicted. The intelligence briefings were flawless, too. Flawless, Reed now recognized, with none of the gaps or uncertainties that characterized genuine intelligence. The mission parameters positioned his team as security detail for a diplomatic convoy traveling between Amman and a forward operating base near the Syrian border. Reed noticed details that would have seemed innocuous before his conversations with Hayes and Fletcher. The convoy route took them through territories that were officially pacified but historically volatile. The diplomatic personnel they were protecting had minimal diplomatic credentials but extensive military backgrounds. The extraction protocols had been revised twice, each time extending their exposure in vulnerable areas. 3 days before deployment, Reed gathered his team at Gray's fishing cabin on the Chesapeake Bay, a location chosen specifically because it could be swept for surveillance devices and had no electronic connectivity. The irony of using Cold War tactics to secure their conversation wasn't lost on him. "I asked you here because what I'm about to share can't be discussed on base or through official channels." Reed began facing the men who had trusted him through dozens of operations. "Before I continue, I need to be absolutely clear: what follows is completely voluntary. Anyone who walks away faces no judgment and no consequences." Gray's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes reflected understanding. At 48, with 20 years of special operations experience, the Master Chief had seen enough to recognize when something was fundamentally wrong. This about Syria, isn't it? And that guardian angel who shouldn't have existed. Reed nodded, relieved at Gray's intuition. Our mission was compromised before we ever left Virginia Beach. We were sent to extract an asset that didn't exist into a kill zone, prepared with detailed knowledge of our operational planning. Carter frowned, the communications specialist's analytical mind immediately questioning. That would require access at the highest levels. Exactly, Reed confirmed. And it wasn't an isolated incident. There have been at least 73 similar operations over the past 3 years, resulting in 42 American casualties. The cabin fell silent as the men absorbed the magnitude of what Reed was describing. That's why Sentinel appeared, Daniels said slowly, connecting the pieces. She was tracking the compromised operations, trying to save the teams being set up. Reed shared everything: his conversation with Hayes Fletcher's evidence, the documented pattern of betrayal that extended to the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership. He laid out the connection to Titan Defense Industries, the weapons transfers disguised as diplomatic missions, and the profit model built on perpetual instability. The Jordan mission is another setup, he concluded. We're not protecting diplomats. We're providing security for illegal weapons transfers that will ultimately destabilize a NATO ally and generate billions in defense contracts. Gray leaned forward, his expression grave. If this goes as high as you're suggesting, reporting it through official channels would be suicide. Exactly why Hayes and Fletcher approached me directly, Reed agreed. They've tried official channels. Whistleblowers end up dead, institutionalized, or discredited. Evidence disappears from secured systems. So what's the alternative? Carter asked, his earlier skepticism giving way to grim understanding. Reed opened the case containing Fletcher's surveillance equipment. We deploy as ordered, but we document everything: the weapons transfers, the contractors, their connections to Titan Industries, the intended recipients. We gather evidence that can't be classified away or dismissed as misunderstanding. And afterward, Daniels asked the question they were all considering. Secured whistleblower protection through Fletcher's network, Reed replied. Congressional allies' media contacts secure facilities until the evidence can be properly presented. Gray ran a hand over his face, the weight of decades of service evident in his expression. In 20 years of operations, I've seen things that didn't add up. Missions that seemed designed to fail intelligence that was too perfect or critically flawed at key moments. I always attributed it to the fog of war or bureaucratic incompetence. We all did, Reed acknowledged. It's easier to believe in incompetence than deliberate betrayal by those we trusted. Carter examined the surveillance equipment with professional interest. This gear is impressive. Cold War design principles with modern components. Analog transmission methods that would be invisible to current monitoring systems. Will you do it? Reed asked, directly respecting each man enough to give them a clean choice. I won't order anyone to participate. This is completely voluntary, and anyone who walks away has my full support and protection. Gray answered first, his decision evidently made before Reed finished speaking. I've buried too many friends whose operations went sideways in ways that never made sense. I'm in. Daniels nodded his agreement. If American forces are being deliberately compromised, exposing that isn't treason, it's the opposite. Carter hesitated longest, his analytical mind weighing all possibilities. The risk is enormous. If we're wrong, or if we're caught before the evidence can be secured. Then we face court-martial, at best elimination, at worst, Reed acknowledged. I won't sugarcoat it. After a long moment, Carter nodded. My brother was killed in an operation in Yemen last year. The official report cited unexpected enemy presence in what was supposed to be a secure extraction zone. If there's even a chance that was deliberate rather than bad luck. Reed understood. For Carter, this had become personal in a way that transcended career considerations or even personal safety. Then, we're agreed, Reed said, feeling both the weight and clarity of purpose that came with their decision. We deploy as ordered, gather the evidence, and expose whoever is betraying American forces for profit. Gray raised an imaginary glass. To the oath we actually took to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Turns out, the domestic part wasn't just ceremonial after all. The night before their deployment to Jordan, Reed sat alone in his apartment, reviewing the mission details one final time. The specialized recording equipment from Fletcher had been carefully integrated into their standard gear, invisible to casual inspection or even detailed inventory checks. His secure phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize, rooftop. Now. Instinct and training kicked in immediately. Reed performed a quick security check of his apartment, verified he wasn't under surveillance, and made his way to the roof via the emergency stairs rather than the elevator. The April night was clear and cool, stars visible despite the light pollution from Virginia Beach. Reed scanned the rooftop, hand instinctively moving toward the concealed sidearm at his back. You can relax, Captain. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have seen the text. Hayes stepped from the shadows near the building's HVAC system. In person, she was not what Reed had expected. About 5'8" athletic, but not imposingly so, with short brown hair and features that would blend into any crowd. Nothing about her physical presence suggested the almost supernatural capabilities she'd demonstrated in Syria. Lieutenant Hayes, Reed acknowledged, his hand moving away from his weapon. Former lieutenant, she corrected. Just Hayes now. Or Sentinel if you prefer the dramatics. I prefer names that appear on official records, Reed replied. Helps me keep track of who's real and who isn't. Hayes smiled slightly. Fair enough, though in my experience, plenty of people with official records aren't who they claim to be. Why the rooftop meeting? Reed asked, cutting to the point. Our deployment is in less than 12 hours. If we're under surveillance, this kind of contact could compromise everything. We're not under surveillance at the moment, Hayes assured him. I've been monitoring all approaches to your building since you returned from Fletcher's briefing. This location is temporarily secure. Reed studied her, noting the confidence that came not from arrogance, but absolute certainty in her capabilities. You took an enormous risk contacting me directly. Calculated risk, she corrected. I needed to verify that you fully understand what you're walking into tomorrow. I thought that was clear from my communications with Fletcher. Hayes moved closer, her expression intensifying. Fletcher sees the strategic picture, but he's been out of field operations for years. The tactical situation you'll face tomorrow is evolving in ways that concern me. Reed felt his combat instincts sharpening. What's changed? Increased security around the convoy. Personnel who match the profile of Titan's private military contractors rather than standard diplomatic security. Equipment loads that suggest preparation for potential engagement rather than routine protection. They're expecting trouble, Reed translated. Hayes nodded, which means either they know you've been compromised or they're preparing for something else entirely. Reed considered the implications. Could they know about our surveillance plan? Unlikely, Hayes assessed. Fletcher's equipment is completely isolated from any network they could monitor, and your team meeting location was secure. My concern is that the weapons transfer itself might be more significant than we initially believed. How so? Hayes removed a small device from her pocket displaying satellite imagery of the convoy route. The timing and location suggest they might be delivering specialized weapons systems rather than standard small arms, possibly man-portable air defense systems or guided anti-tank weapons. Reed studied the images, recognizing the strategic implications immediately. Those would dramatically escalate any regional conflict, potentially bringing in larger powers if deployed against Turkish or Israeli forces. Exactly, Hayes confirmed, which means the security will be tighter and the consequences of exposure much higher. They can't afford witnesses if this delivery includes restricted weapons technologies. Reed processed this new information, recalibrating his assessment of the mission's dangers. You think it's a trap specifically designed for us? I think it's a high-value weapons transfer that they can't afford to have exposed, Hayes clarified. Whether they suspect your team specifically is unclear, but they'll eliminate any threat to the operation without hesitation. She handed Reed a small case. Additional surveillance equipment calibrated for weapons systems identification. If they are transferring restricted technologies, we need documented proof of exactly what systems are involved and their intended recipients. Reed accepted the case, the weight of their undertaking settling more firmly on his shoulders. You'll be monitoring from the moment you cross into Jordan, Hayes confirmed. I've established observation positions along the convoy route and prepared extraction contingencies if the situation deteriorates. Like Syria, Reed noted. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Hayes replied. The best outcome is for you to gather the evidence without arousing suspicion, complete the mission as assigned, and return through official channels with documentation intact. Reed nodded, though both of them recognized the unlikelihood of the operation proceeding without complications. One question that's been bothering me: why me? Why my team? Hayes studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Your service record, your psych profile, your response to the Syria ambush. You demonstrated both the tactical competence to survive and the moral clarity to recognize when something fundamental was wrong. There must be dozens of operators with similar qualifications. Fewer than you might think, Hayes said with unexpected weariness. The system is designed to select for obedience over independent judgment. Officers who ask too many questions don't advance to command positions. Yet here we are, Reed observed. Yet here we are, Hayes agreed. Sometimes the system's filters miss people like you, Captain. People who remember that their oath was to the Constitution, not to individuals or institutions that claim to represent it. With that assessment hanging between them, Hayes moved back toward the shadows. Euro 600 deployment. Standard protocols until you reach the convoy rendezvous. From that point forward, assume all communications are compromised except through Fletcher's equipment. Understood, Reed acknowledged. And Hayes, thank you. For Syria. For whatever happens tomorrow. She paused at the roof's edge. Don't thank me yet, Captain. The hardest part isn't exposing the truth. It's living with the consequences of people believing it. Before Reed could respond, she disappeared over the side of the building with the fluid efficiency that had allowed her to eliminate 40 enemy combatants in Syria without being detected. The deployment to Jordan proceeded according to plan, with Reed's team arriving at a forward operating base outside Amman at precisely 0900 local time. The spring heat was already building the air dry and heavy with dust as they completed equipment checks and mission briefings. The diplomatic convoy they would be protecting consisted of 3 armored SUVs with U.S. Department of State markings and 6 personnel described as economic development advisors focused on regional stability initiatives. Reed noted that all 6 diplomats moved with the unmistakable bearing of former military operators, their situational awareness and physical conditioning inconsistent with typical State Department profiles. The convoy commander, A man who introduced himself as Richard Keller conducted the pre-mission briefing with precision that further confirmed Reed's suspicions. His knowledge of tactical movement security protocols and regional threats reflected decades of military experience rather than diplomatic service. Our route takes us through territory that has been recently pacified but maintains potential for hostile activity, Keller explained, highlighting their course on a digital map. We'll be moving at security speed, maintaining tactical spacing between vehicles, and adhering to counter-ambush protocols at all choke points. Gray caught Reed's eye across the briefing room, a subtle confirmation passing between them. This was not standard diplomatic security procedure. This was a military operation disguised as diplomatic movement. "Any questions, Captain Reed?" Keller asked, his tone professionally cordial, but his eyes evaluating. "Expected duration at the border meeting site?" Reed asked, maintaining his role as security commander concerned only with tactical considerations. "Approximately 90 minutes, Keller replied. "The discussions are technical in nature, focused on infrastructure development, rather than political negotiation." Reed nodded, noting the deliberate vagueness. "My team will establish perimeter security and maintain overwatch positions throughout the meeting. Standard protocols for diplomatic protection." "Perfect," Keller confirmed. "We depart in 30 minutes. Communications check at H-5. As the briefing dispersed, Reed and his team performed final equipment preparations, activating Fletcher's surveillance devices under the guise of standard gear checks. Each system powered up, silently recording and transmitting to secure servers beyond the reach of those who might want the evidence destroyed. Carter approached under the pretense of reviewing communication protocols. "All systems active and transmitting," he confirmed quietly. "Signal strength optimal. Fletcher's equipment is impressive, completely invisible to standard electronic countermeasures." Gray joined them, his voice low. "Our diplomats are carrying sidearms under those blazers. Saw one adjusting a shoulder holster during the briefing. State Department economic advisors don't typically come armed to infrastructure meetings." Daniels completed their circle, ostensibly reviewing medical supplies. "The third vehicle has reinforced suspension and specialized compartments. I recognize the modifications from similar transport systems we used in Afghanistan for sensitive equipment movement." Reed processed these observations, each confirming Hayes's intelligence about the true nature of their mission. "Maintain standard protocols until we reach the meeting site. Record everything, but show no unusual interest in the convoy's activities." The drive from Amman toward the Syrian border proceeded without incident, the convoy moving with practiced efficiency through checkpoints and urban areas. Reed noted that Keller's team maintained constant communication using State Department channels, but periodically switched to secondary frequencies for brief exchanges, another deviation from diplomatic protocols. As they approached the designated meeting location, an abandoned warehouse complex near the border, Reed activated the additional surveillance equipment Hayes had provided. The specialized sensors would identify and document any weapons systems being transferred, creating irrefutable evidence of the transaction's true nature. The warehouse stood isolated in the desert landscape, surrounded by minimal perimeter security that appeared to be Jordanian military, but displayed subtle inconsistencies in uniform and equipment that suggested private contractors disguised as official forces. "Establish perimeter security," Reed ordered as the convoy halted. "Standard diplomatic protection protocols. Gray and Daniels on overwatch from the north and east positions. Carter with me on close protection." His team deployed as ordered, each member activating additional surveillance equipment as they moved into position. From his vantage point, Reed observed the warehouse interior through high-powered optics, documenting as Keller's team unloaded hard-sided cases from the third vehicle. "Captain Reed," Keller called over his tone, remaining professional, but with an edge of command that betrayed his military background. "We'll be conducting our meeting inside. Your team should maintain external security. Only our Jordanian counterparts are sensitive about foreign military presence during these discussions." Reed nodded his understanding while noting another protocol violation. Diplomatic security would typically maintain visual contact with protected persons at all times. "Understood. We'll secure the perimeter and maintain communication channels. Standard diplomatic protection distance." As Keller's team entered the warehouse with their equipment cases, a second convoy approached from the Eastern Road vehicles without markings or diplomatic identifiers, moving with the disciplined spacing of military rather than civilian drivers. "Unknown convoy approaching from the east," Reed reported over their official channel. "6 vehicles, unmarked military driving pattern." "Acknowledged," Keller responded, his tone unconcerned. "Those are our Jordanian counterparts, expected participants in today's discussions." Reed switched to Fletcher's secure communication system, speaking quietly to his team. "Full surveillance activation. Document every individual vehicle and equipment transfer." From his overwatch position, Gray reported on the secure channel. "The Jordanian counterparts aren't Jordanian military or government. Equipment profiles and tactical movement suggest non-state actors, possibly Kurdish separatist forces or Syrian opposition groups." Carter Monitoring Communications added, "They're using encrypted channels that don't match Jordanian military protocols. Signal patterns are consistent with groups operating in northern Syria." The meeting proceeded inside the warehouse with Reed's team maintaining their security positions while documenting every aspect of the transaction. Through specialized optics, they observed as Keller's team opened the equipment cases, revealing components that Reed immediately recognized as advanced man-portable air defense systems, exactly as Hayes had predicted. Confirming MANPAD's transfer, Reed reported through Fletcher's secure channel. "Latest generation Stinger variants with modified targeting systems. Extremely restricted technology not approved for transfer to any regional forces." The implications were immediate and severe. Such weapons could down Turkish military aircraft or civilian airliners, creating an international incident that would demand military response and intervention. For nearly an hour, they documented as Keller's team demonstrated the weapons systems to the separatist representatives, providing technical training and operational guidance that went far beyond equipment delivery. This wasn't just a weapons transfer, it was comprehensive preparation for deployment against specific targets. "They're providing target packages," Gray reported, his experienced eye catching details through his observation position. "Maps, schedules, approach vectors. They're not just supplying weapons, they're directing exactly how and where to use them." Reed felt cold certainty settling in his stomach. This evidence went beyond what they had expected to find. This was direct facilitation of attacks against a NATO ally by American contractors operating under diplomatic cover. As the transaction concluded and equipment cases changed hands, Reed observed Keller receiving what appeared to be confirmation codes and financial transfer verification. The separatist forces began loading the weapons into their vehicles while Keller's team prepared to depart. "Primary evidence secured and transmitted," Carter confirmed quietly. "Full documentation of personnel weapon systems and transaction details." Reed nodded a moment of grim satisfaction at having confirmed exactly what Hayes and Fletcher had suspected. But that satisfaction evaporated instantly as Carter's expression changed, his hand moving to his communication equipment. "Captain, we've got a problem," he whispered urgently. "Our surveillance transmission was just pinged by an active scanner. Someone's searching specifically for our frequency." Reed felt adrenaline surge through his system. How Fletcher said this equipment was undetectable by standard methods. Not standard methods, Carter confirmed, his fingers dancing across his equipment. This is a directed scan, using parameters specifically designed to detect Cold War-era transmission protocols. Someone knows exactly what to look for. Before Reed could process this information, Keller emerged from the warehouse, his expression unchanged, but his posture subtly different, the relaxed diplomacy replaced by combat readiness. "Captain Reed," he called, voice carrying across the compound. "A moment of your time, please." Reed approached, maintaining his professional demeanor while acutely aware that their covert mission had potentially been compromised. "Sir?" Keller smiled thinly, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Fascinating technology you're carrying, Captain. Old school but effective. We detected some unusual transmission patterns that don't match standard military protocols." Reed kept his expression neutral, years of combat experience preventing any reaction that might confirm Keller's suspicion. "All our equipment is standard issue, sir. Perhaps interference from the Jordanian communication systems." Keller studied him for a long moment, the pretense of diplomatic courtesy evaporating. "You know, Captain, loyalty is a complicated virtue. Most people think it means unwavering dedication to institutions or chains of command. But true loyalty requires more nuanced judgment about which interests truly serve one's country." The statement was simultaneously an accusation and a recruitment attempt, testing whether Reed might be turned rather than eliminated. Reed recognized the approach from counterintelligence training, assess potential compromise before deciding on termination. "My loyalty is to my mission and my men, sir," Reed replied carefully. "As it always has been." Keller nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Of course. And your current mission is diplomatic protection, correct? Not surveillance or intelligence gathering outside your authorization." Before Reed could respond, Gray's voice came urgently through his standard communication channel. "Captain, multiple armed personnel moving into flanking positions around the compound. Not the separatist forces, new players with tactical gear and coordinated movement." Reed maintained eye contact with Keller, not acknowledging Gray's warning. "My team is focused exclusively on ensuring the security of this diplomatic mission, sir." "I'm glad to hear that," Keller said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word. "Because unauthorized surveillance of State Department operations would constitute a serious breach of security protocols, the kind of breach that ends careers, or worse." The threat hung in the air between them, neither man bothering to disguise its meaning. Reed was acutely aware that they had crossed a threshold. Keller knew, or strongly suspected, they had documented the weapons transfer, and standard protocol for such exposure would be immediate elimination of witnesses. "We should prepare for departure," Reed suggested, maintaining the fiction of normal operations while frantically calculating extraction options. "The return window to Amman closes in 90 minutes. Keller smiled again, the expression chilling in its insincerity. "There's been a change of plans, Captain. Your team will be remaining here to provide security for some additional meetings. My team will return to Amman with the Jordanian security detail." It was a death sentence thinly disguised as a mission change, separating Reed's team from witnesses and official channels before eliminating them. The additional meetings would never materialize, and their bodies would likely never be found. "Sir, our orders specify that we maintain close protection throughout the mission duration," Reed objected, playing for time while signaling his team through subtle hand gestures visible only to Gray's overwatch position. "Orders change, Captain," Keller replied with artificial casualness, "particularly when circumstances require flexibility." Reed nodded, as if accepting this explanation, while mentally transitioning to combat readiness. "Understood, sir. I'll inform my team of the updated parameters." As he turned to move back toward Carter's position, Reed heard the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied behind him, safeties disengaged, rounds chambered. The pretense was evaporating faster than he had anticipated. "Actually," Captain Keller said, his voice hardening, "I think it's best if you and your team surrender your weapons now. Standard security protocol when plans change so dramatically." Reed turned slowly, confirming what he already knew. Keller and two of his diplomatic staff had drawn sidearms, keeping them low but unmistakably directed at him. "Of course," Reed replied, his mind racing through tactical options while his body maintained the appearance of compliance. Standard protocol. The next few seconds would determine whether they lived or died. Reed had one significant advantage. Hayes was monitoring the operation and had likely observed the deteriorating situation. Whether she could intervene in time remained the critical unknown. Reed moved his hand slowly toward his sidearm, as if preparing to surrender it as requested. In that moment, he made his decision. They would not die quietly in a desert warehouse, buried as collateral damage in a corrupt weapons scheme. Whatever happened next, the truth would survive, even if they did not. Time compressed into tactical moments for Captain Mason Reed as he faced Keller's drawn weapon. Years of combat experience had taught him that survival often hinged on microseconds and millimeters, the space between heartbeats, where decisions crystallized into action. "You know, Captain," Keller said, his voice carrying the casual confidence of a man accustomed to these scenarios, "I had my suspicions about your team from the beginning. The way you observed our equipment, your communication patterns, your excessive interest in our Jordanian counterparts. Small things, but telling." Reed maintained eye contact, his hand still moving in the slow motion of apparent surrender, while his peripheral vision tracked the positions of Keller's men. 3 armed diplomats in immediate vicinity, 2 more by the vehicle's unknown number inside the warehouse. Unfavorable odds, but not impossible. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize surveillance when I see it," Keller continued. "The question is, who sent you official channels or something else?" The question confirmed Reed's assessment. Keller suspected unauthorized surveillance, but wasn't certain of its origin or extent. This uncertainty created a narrow window of opportunity. "Sir, with respect, I do not understand what you're implying," Reed replied, maintaining the fiction of confusion. "My team is here under direct orders from CENTCOM to provide security for a diplomatic mission." Keller's smile tightened. "Let's not waste time with these games, Captain. We both know this isn't about diplomatic security. The only question remaining is whether you and your team leave this compound alive or become unfortunate casualties of a separatist attack on American personnel." The threat hung in the desert air, punctuated by the subtle clicks of weapons being readied around the perimeter. Reed's mind calculated angles, distances, cover options, the battlefield geometry that would determine survival. Through his earpiece, Gray's voice came in a controlled whisper. 6 hostiles visible from my position. 3 more approaching from the east. They're setting up a crossfire pattern." Reed gave an imperceptible nod, a movement so slight only his team would recognize its significance, the signal to prepare for immediate hostile engagement. "You've miscalculated, Keller," Reed said, his tone shifting from diplomatic compliance to combat readiness. "Whatever you think you know, whoever you think sent us, you've overlooked something critical." Keller's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. "And what's that, Captain? We're not alone." The single crack of a precision rifle shot shattered the tension, followed immediately by the distinctive thump of a body hitting the ground behind Keller. One of his security team collapsed, a shot placed with surgical precision through his body armor's edge seam, a shot that required both exceptional skill and intimate knowledge of tactical gear vulnerabilities. Chaos erupted As Keller and his remaining men scrambled for cover, their careful ambush suddenly disrupted by an unseen sniper. Reed seized the moment of confusion, drawing his sidearm and diving behind a concrete barrier as gunfire erupted across the compound. "Sentinel has engaged," Reed confirmed through Fletcher's secure communication system. "All units execute extraction protocol. Carter, confirm evidence transmission." "Transmission complete and backed up," Carter reported from his position behind an abandoned shipping container. "All data secured on remote servers." Gray had already shifted to his secondary firing position, providing covering fire that kept Keller's forces pinned down. "East side secure. Vehicle access route still viable." Through the cacophony of gunfire, Reed heard Daniels calling out, "Wilson is hit! Taking cover behind the southern vehicle." Reed calculated their options with cold precision. Their primary extraction plan required reaching their vehicles, but Keller's forces had established firing positions that covered the direct route. A frontal assault would result in casualties they couldn't afford. "Maintain positions and return fire," Reed ordered. "Wait for Sentinel to disrupt their defensive line." As if summoned by his words, a series of precision shots began systematically eliminating Keller's defensive positions. Each shot targeted weak points in cover or exploited momentary exposures with uncanny anticipation, the same tactical pattern Hayes had demonstrated in Syria. "She's creating an extraction corridor at the northwest corner," Gray observed, "reducing their fire concentration on our primary route." Reed confirmed the pattern, recognizing Hayes's signature approach of tactical problem-solving. She wasn't just eliminating targets randomly, she was systematically reshaping the battlefield geometry to create a viable escape route. "Carter, Gray, provide covering fire," Reed ordered. "Daniels, I'm coming to your position to assist with Wilson." Moving in combat rushes 3 to 5 second sprints between cover positions, Reed crossed the exposed ground to where Daniels was treating Wilson. The wounded SEAL had taken a round to the upper leg, serious but not immediately life-threatening with proper medical intervention. "Pressure bandage applied, bleeding controlled," Daniels reported with clinical efficiency. "He can move with assistance but not at full speed." Reed nodded, already formulating the revised extraction plan. "Carter, bring our primary vehicle to the south barricade. Gray, focus fire on the warehouse entrance. Deny them reinforcement capability." As his team executed the coordinated movement, Reed maintained situational awareness of the evolving battlefield. Hayes's precision fire had eliminated nearly half of Keller's security forces, but the remaining operators had adapted, taking positions that minimized their exposure to her firing angles. "Keller is moving toward the third vehicle," Gray reported. "Appears to be recovering documentation or equipment." Reed recognized the significance immediately. Keller was salvaging evidence of the transaction, likely including financial records and authorization codes that would further implicate the conspiracy's leadership. "Can you engage?" Reed asked. "Negative. No clean shot from this position." Reed made a split-second decision. "Carter, continue with vehicle extraction. Get Wilson and Daniels clear. Gray, maintain overwatch. I'm going to intercept Keller." "Sir, that's putting you in direct crossfire," Carter objected. "It's also our best chance to secure additional evidence," Reed countered. "Execute as ordered." Without waiting for further objections, Reed moved in a flanking pattern toward Keller's position, using the disruption created by Hayes's precision fire to advance undetected. Years of special operations had honed his movement to near invisibility, each step placed with deliberate care, each transition between cover positions timed to coincide with distractions elsewhere on the battlefield. He reached the vehicle just as Keller was extracting a hardened laptop case from a concealed compartment. The former military contractor turned at Reed's approach, his hand dropping to his sidearm with practiced speed. Reed was faster, the muzzle of his weapon steady at center mass. "Drop it, Keller. It's over." Keller froze, his expression calculating rather than fearful. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Captain. This goes higher than you can possibly imagine." "I know exactly what I'm involved in," Reed replied. "Illegal weapons transfers to non-state actors, deliberate destabilization of regional security, compromised military operations for corporate profit. What I don't know yet is how high the authorization chain reaches." A thin smile spread across Keller's face. "And you think you'll live long enough to find out there are people involved who can erase your entire existence with a single phone call? People who control the systems you trusted your entire career. That's why we've already transmitted all evidence to secure locations," Reed informed him. "Multiple copies, multiple jurisdictions, automatic release protocols if anything happens to us. You can kill us, but you can't kill the truth." Something shifted in Keller's expression. A recalculation of odds, a recognition that the situation had evolved beyond his control. "You're working with her, aren't you? The ghost who shouldn't exist." "But I'm working for the oath I took," Reed corrected him, "to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now drop the weapon and step away from the vehicle." For a moment, Reed thought Keller would comply, his body language suggesting surrender. Then, the older man's eyes flicked to something over Reed's shoulder, a momentary tell that saved Reed's life as he instinctively dove sideways. Gunfire erupted from behind, rounds impacting where he'd stood a split second earlier. One of Keller's men had flanked their position, creating the distraction Keller needed. The contractor seized the opportunity, dropping behind the vehicle's engine block for cover while drawing his sidearm. Reed rolled behind a concrete barrier, returning fire at the flanking attacker. His rounds found their mark, dropping the man mid-stride, but the momentary division of attention had allowed Keller to establish a defensive position. "You should have taken the offer to stand down earlier," Keller called out. "Now you'll join the long list of operational casualties that never make the official record." Reed didn't bother responding, conserving his energy and focus for the tactical problem at hand. Keller was pinned behind the vehicle, but had access to multiple weapons and possibly communications equipment. Direct assault would be suicidal. Through his earpiece, Carter reported, "Primary vehicle secure. Wilson and Daniels aboard. Ready for extraction on your command." "Execute extraction," Reed ordered. "Get clear of the compound. I'll follow with secondary transport." "Sir, we can provide covering fire," Carter began. "Negative," Reed cut him off. "Primary objective is securing the evidence. Get it and the wounded clear now. That's an order." Even as he spoke, Reed was calculating his next move. Keller remained his primary target, not just for the additional evidence he carried, but because capturing a key figure in the conspiracy would provide testimony that couldn't be easily dismissed or classified away. The distinctive crack of Hayes's precision rifle drew Reed's attention as two more of Keller's security team dropped from carefully placed shots. The pattern of her fire had changed. Instead of creating an extraction corridor, she was now systematically isolating Keller, eliminating his supporting elements one by one. Reed recognized the tactical opportunity immediately. Hayes was creating the conditions for capture rather than elimination, reducing the threat while maintaining Keller as a viable prisoner. "Hold your position, Captain." Hayes's voice came through Fletcher's secure communication system. "I'm neutralizing his support elements. 30 seconds to secure engagement conditions." Reed acknowledged with a single tap on his communication device, maintaining his position while Hayes methodically eliminated Keller's remaining security. Each shot came from a different position, creating the impression of multiple snipers rather than a single operator a tactic that amplified psychological pressure on the remaining targets. Within moments, Keller was completely isolated, his planned ambush transformed into a tactical disaster. Reed could hear him attempting to establish communication with remaining forces, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of a commander watching his position collapse. "It's over, Keller," Reed called out. "Your team is neutralized, the evidence is secured, and reinforcements won't arrive in time. You have one option left: surrender and cooperate." A bitter laugh came from behind the vehicle. "You think this ends with me? I'm one node in a network that spans every branch of military and intelligence operations. Kill me or capture me, it changes nothing." "Maybe not," Reed acknowledged, "but it's a start." Before Keller could respond, a single shot rang out, striking the ground inches from his position, a deliberate warning from Hayes that demonstrated her firing solution was complete. Keller could be eliminated at any moment, a reality his combat experience would force him to recognize. "Final offer," Reed stated flatly. "Surrender now or die where you stand. There's no extraction coming for you." Long seconds of silence followed, broken finally by the sound of a weapon sliding across pavement. "Don't shoot. I'm coming out." Keller emerged slowly. Hands raised, his expression a mixture of resignation and calculation. Reed approached cautiously, weapon trained center mass, taking no chances with a man whose entire career had been built on deception. "Face down, hands behind your head," Reed ordered, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. As Keller complied, Reed secured him with tactical restraints, then recovered the laptop case and additional documentation from the vehicle. Initial inspection confirmed his assessment. The materials contained authorization codes, financial transfers, and communication records that would implicate figures far above Keller's pay grade. "Evidence secured," Reed reported through the secure channel. "Proceeding with prisoner extraction." "Negative on prisoner transport," Hayes responded, her tone firm. "Too high risk for intervention during movement. Fletcher's team is inbound for specialized extraction. Secure the prisoner and additional evidence in the northern warehouse section. Reinforcement in 12 minutes." Reed acknowledged the order, recognizing the tactical logic. Transporting a high-value prisoner like Keller through unsecured territory would create multiple opportunities for interdiction or elimination by the very network they were attempting to expose. As he secured Keller in the designated location, the contractor's earlier bravado had given way to calculating cooperation, the psychological transition of a professional assessing new realities and identifying potential advantages in changed circumstances. "You have no idea what you're involved in." "Captain," Keller said, his tone conversational despite his restrained position. "The people I work for control the systems that would prosecute me, the intelligence agencies that would investigate them, and the congressional committees that would oversee those agencies." Reed continued securing the area, unimpressed by the attempt at psychological manipulation. "If that were entirely true, you wouldn't sound so worried." A thin smile crossed Keller's face. "Not worried. Realistic. You've won the tactical engagement, I acknowledge that. But the strategic reality remains unchanged. This evidence will disappear into classified systems. Witnesses will be discredited or eliminated. The network will adapt and continue operations under revised protocols." "You seem very confident for a man facing treason charges," Reed observed. "Treason is a matter of perspective, and more importantly, jurisdiction," Keller replied. "What appears illegal under conventional interpretation becomes authorized covert action under appropriate executive findings. The evidence you've secured will never see public light." Reed studied him, recognizing the confidence of a man accustomed to operating with high-level protection. "You're assuming the evidence goes through official channels." Something flickered in Keller's eyes, the first genuine concern Reed had observed. "You're working with her, aren't you, the ghost operator? The one they've been hunting for 3 years." Before Reed could respond, the distinctive sound of approaching vehicles reached them. Through his tactical optics, he confirmed Fletcher's extraction team, arriving at the compound perimeter, 4 unmarked SUVs, moving with the disciplined precision of experienced operators. The team that deployed from the vehicles moved with the fluid coordination that characterized elite operators, but Reed noted their equipment and tactics reflected an earlier era of special operations, more reminiscent of Cold War methodologies than current doctrine. These were veterans from Fletcher's generation, men whose experience stretched back to operations most modern military personnel had only read about in classified histories. The team leader approached Reed, his weathered face suggesting decades of operational experience. "Colonel Fletcher sends his regards. We're here to secure the package and additional materials." Reed noted they used no names, no specific references to their mission, classic operational security, from an era where deniability was paramount. He transferred custody of Keller to the extraction team along with the secured evidence from the vehicle. "The primary evidence package has already been transmitted," Reed informed the team leader. "This material provides additional context and authorization chains." The older operator nodded, understanding the significance. "We'll ensure everything reaches the appropriate channels. Your extraction vehicle is at the north perimeter. The route has been secured." As Keller was transferred to one of the waiting vehicles, he locked eyes with Reed one final time. "This isn't over, Captain. The system always protects itself." "Not this time," Reed replied with quiet certainty. As the extraction team departed with their prisoner and evidence, Reed moved toward his designated extraction point, maintaining tactical awareness of potential threats. The compound had fallen silent, the earlier gunfire replaced by the eerie quiet that follows combat, a stillness punctuated only by the desert wind moving dust across abandoned positions. The vehicle waiting for him was nondescript, a local model with civilian markings that would attract no special attention on Jordanian roads. The driver, however, was unexpected. "Need a ride, Captain?" Hayes asked, as he approached her appearance transformed from the rooftop meeting in Virginia Beach. Her hair was different, her complexion altered by subtle cosmetics, her entire bearing shifted to present as a local contractor rather than an American operator. Reed slid into the passenger seat, securing his equipment, as Hayes accelerated away from the compound. "I thought you avoided direct contact during operations." "Special circumstances," she replied, her attention on the road and surrounding terrain. "Keller was too valuable to risk standard extraction protocols. The fact that you captured him alive changes our strategic position significantly." Reed processed this as they moved through the desert landscape, putting distance between themselves and the operations site. "His capture was your objective from the beginning, wasn't it? Not just the evidence." Hayes nodded slightly, confirming his assessment. "The evidence documents the crimes. Keller provides context and connection to higher-level authorization. His testimony, properly leveraged, can bypass the classification systems that would normally bury this kind of exposure." "Will he cooperate?" Reed asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Men like Keller calculate survival odds with cold precision," Hayes replied. "When he recognizes that his former employers now represent his greatest threat, self-preservation will guide his decisions. Fletcher knows how to manage that transition." They drove in silence for several minutes, both processing the operational aftermath and preparing for the challenges ahead. Reed found himself studying Hayes with professional assessment, noting the precise economy of her movements, the constant environmental scanning, the tactical positioning that maintained optimum control even in a civilian vehicle. She was everything her reputation suggested, and more. "Your team performed exceptionally," Hayes said, finally breaking the silence. "Gray's tactical positioning was textbook perfect. Carter's evidence transmission protocols never faltered under pressure. Daniels handled Wilson's injury with remarkable efficiency." "They're the best," Reed acknowledged simply. "They'll need to be," Hayes continued, "because what comes next will be significantly more challenging than what you faced today." Reed understood immediately. The system's response. Hayes nodded, her expression grim. "When Keller fails to report, and evidence begins reaching unauthorized channels, the network will activate containment protocols. Your team has transitioned from operational assets to existential threats in their assessment." "They'll try to eliminate us," Reed translated. "More than that," Hayes corrected. "They'll attempt to discredit you. First psychiatric evaluations suggesting paranoia, evidence of procedural violations during previous deployments, financial irregularities created retroactively in your records. Elimination comes only after they've established a narrative that makes your death or disappearance seem reasonable." Reed processed this with the same tactical calculation he applied to battlefield threats. "How do we counter? By moving faster than their response cycle," Hayes replied. "The evidence you secured is already being processed for release through multiple channels. Congressional oversight committees, military justice advocates, and selected journalists with established national security credentials. Fletcher's network has prepared secure locations for your team while the initial evidence verification proceeds." The desert landscape gave way to more populated areas as they approached Amman Hayes, adjusting their route to avoid military checkpoints and surveillance positions. Reed noted her intimate knowledge of surveillance patterns and security protocols, further evidence of her intelligence background and ongoing operational awareness. "Fletcher said you tried official channels first," Reed said. "What happened?" Hayes's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 years ago, I identified the pattern of compromised operations while analyzing after-action reports. The statistical anomalies were subtle but unmistakable to anyone looking specifically for them, mission parameters that maximized exposure and minimized extraction options, intelligence that directed teams into prepared positions, operational timing that consistently benefited certain private contractors. And when you reported your findings, I followed procedure, she said, a hint of bitter irony coloring her words. Submitted analysis through proper channels, requested formal investigation, provided supporting documentation. Within 48 hours, I was removed from duty pending psychiatric evaluation. Within 72 hours, my security clearance was suspended. Within 1 week, I was facing discharge for patterns of concerning behavior indicative of paranoid ideation. Reed recognized the calculated efficiency of the response using psychiatric discreditation to neutralize threats while maintaining institutional deniability. And after discharge, they sent a team to my apartment. Hayes continued, her voice clinically detached despite the personal nature of the account. 3 operators, professional equipment, non-standard tactics, not military contractors with deniable authorization. They expected to find a discharged intelligence officer with standard training. They found something else. The understated description told Reed everything he needed to know. Hayes had been trained beyond standard parameters, possessed skills and capabilities that exceeded normal special operations preparation. The elimination team had encountered an adversary they weren't prepared to handle. That's when you went underground, Reed concluded. Hayes nodded. I established new identity protocols, secured independent resources, and began systematic monitoring of special operations deployments that matched the compromise pattern. When possible, I intervened directly in compromised operations, your team in Syria being the most recent example. Reed considered the immense personal cost of her chosen path, years operating alone, hunted by the very institutions she had served, witnessing American forces betrayed by their own command structures. Why continue? Why not simply disappear after ensuring your own survival? Hayes was silent for a long moment, her focus seemingly on navigating the increasingly dense traffic as they entered Amman's outskirts. When she finally answered, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Because the oath doesn't expire with discharge papers," she said simply. "I swore to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic." Those weren't just words to me. The simple declaration carried more impact than any elaborate justification. Reed understood it at the most fundamental level, the commitment that transcended institutional affiliation or official authorization. "Your team is already at the secure location." Hayes continued, transitioning back to operational matters. "Wilson's injury has been treated by Fletcher's medical personnel. Gray, Carter, and Daniels are assisting with evidence compilation and verification." "And what's our next step?" Reed asked. "Witness protection protocols while the evidence package is prepared for release," Hayes replied. "Fletcher has established secure communications with 3 Congressional Oversight Committee members who have proven resistant to pressure and compromise. The initial evidence release is scheduled for 48 hours from now, targeted specifically to bypass classification barriers and ensure public disclosure." Reed processed the accelerated timeline. "They'll know who provided the evidence. My team will be permanently burned." "Yes," Hayes acknowledged without sugarcoating the reality. "Fletcher has prepared contingencies, new identities, secure resources, protected channels for eventual testimony when formal investigations begin. But your military careers, as officially recognized, are over." The blunt assessment hung between them as Hayes navigated through Amman's crowded streets. Reed had known this outcome was likely from the moment he agreed to document the weapons transfer, but the finality of it still carried emotional weight. 15 years of service, concluding not with honors, but with necessary flight from the very institutions he had sworn to serve. "Small price to pay," Reed said finally, "compared to the cost of allowing the betrayal to continue." Hayes glanced at him briefly, something like approval flickering in her expression. "That's why Fletcher chose you. He said you'd understand what matters most when the moment came." They transitioned to the outskirts of Amman, approaching an unmarked building that showed signs of commercial use, but with subtle security measures, Reed's trained eye immediately identified overlapping fields of surveillance, reinforced access points, multiple egress options. Classic safe house configuration executed with professional precision. "Fletcher's network has been preparing for this moment for years," Hayes explained as they approached. "Securing evidence, establishing protected channels, building the infrastructure needed to expose corruption at this level without being neutralized in the process." Inside the facility, Reed found his team already integrated into an operation that showed signs of long planning and meticulous execution. Gray was working with a team analyzing tactical communications from the compound engagement. Carter was collaborating with technical specialists to verify and authenticate the evidence transmission. Daniels was consulting with medical personnel regarding Wilson's ongoing treatment. Colonel Fletcher stood at the center of the operation, his weathered face showing the focused intensity of a commander in his element. Despite his 70 years, he projected the undiminished authority that had characterized his legendary career in special operations. "Captain Reed," Fletcher acknowledged as they entered. "Excellent work securing both the primary evidence and Keller. His capture significantly accelerates our timeline." "Where is he now?" Reed asked. "Secure holding facility outside Amman," Fletcher replied. Initial interrogation already underway. He's calculating his options with professional detachment, which works to our advantage. Men like Keller prioritize survival over loyalty when the equations change. Reed surveyed the operations center, noting the mixture of cutting-edge technology and old-school tradecraft that characterized Fletcher's approach. Hayes mentioned 48 hours until evidence release. What's our operational status until then? Defense and preparation, Fletcher replied. When Keller fails to report, containment protocols will activate immediately. Their first priority will be locating and eliminating witnesses before evidence can be verified and released. We're already detecting increased chatter on military and intelligence channels regarding your team's status. Reed processed this with tactical calculation. How extensive is their reach? What assets can they deploy? Within traditional military channels, their authorization is limited by need for deniability, Fletcher explained. But they have extensive connections with private military contractors who operate without conventional restrictions. Expect surveillance activation throughout Jordan and surrounding countries' heightened border security protocols and potential direct action teams if they confirm your location. And Hayes joined them, having completed her security verification protocols. We're already detecting digital intrusion attempts against known associates of your team members. They are establishing background for the official narrative that your team went rogue during a standard deployment, possibly compromised by foreign interests. The calculated efficiency of the response confirmed everything Fletcher and Hayes had described about the network's capabilities and reach. This wasn't random corruption or isolated betrayal. This was a sophisticated system designed to protect itself with institutional precision. What about our families and connections back home? Reed asked, thinking of his team's vulnerabilities. Already under protection, Fletcher assured him. We activated security protocols for all immediate family members and close associates the moment your operation began. They've been moved to secure locations under plausible pretexts: vacations, professional conferences, family emergencies. No digital or physical trail connecting them to your current situation. Reed nodded, relieved. That aspect had been addressed, but still processing the implications of how thoroughly their lives had been disrupted. And the evidence chain, how do we ensure it can't be discredited or classified away? Fletcher gestured toward the technical section where Carter was working. Multiple verification protocols, distributed storage across secure systems, authentication methods that can't be retroactively compromised. Most importantly, simultaneous release through multiple channels, congressional media, military justice, and international oversight organizations. The key is structural design, Hayes added. If evidence reaches only one channel, they can contain it through classification or discreditation. When it simultaneously appears through multiple independent channels with consistent authentication, the containment protocols collapse under their own contradictions. Reed recognized the strategic approach, using the network's own institutional complexity against it by forcing incompatible containment responses across different systems. And Keller's testimony, being secured through deposition protocols that meet both military justice requirements and congressional oversight standards, Fletcher confirmed. His statement alone would be insufficient, vulnerable to discreditation as coerced or self-serving. But combined with the documentary evidence and your team's testimony, it creates an interlocking verification system that can withstand institutional attacks. The next 36 hours passed in a carefully orchestrated progression of evidence, compilation, witness statement, preparation, and security monitoring. Reed worked closely with Fletcher and Hayes, applying his tactical experience to anticipate potential countermeasures from the network they were exposing. The turning point came unexpectedly through channels none of them had anticipated. Gray, monitoring military communication systems for signs of impending action against their position, detected an anomalous pattern in routine transmission protocols. "Sir, sir," he called to Fletcher, his expression reflecting professional concern. "I'm picking up verification requests for deployment authorization regarding a high-value terrorist target in our general vicinity. Request patterns suggest Joint Special Operations Command assets being activated without standard oversight notifications." Fletcher moved to Gray's position, immediately studying the communications with the experienced eye of someone who had designed similar protocols decades earlier. "They're bypassing normal authorization chains, setting up direct action under counterterrorism justification to eliminate oversight questions." "Timeline?" Reed asked, immediately shifting to tactical assessment. "Based on deployment signatures, less than 12 hours, Gray estimated. They're positioning assets but waiting for final confirmation on our precise location." Hayes joined them, her analysis confirming Gray's assessment. "They're creating parallel operational authorization, one through conventional military channels with limited information, another through their compromised network with the actual objective. The conventional operators won't know they're being used to eliminate American personnel until it's too late. We need to accelerate the evidence release." Fletcher decided, recognizing the tactical situation had evolved beyond their initial timeline. Better to move with incomplete preparation than risk complete suppression. The operations center transformed into focused activity as Fletcher's team initiated the accelerated protocol. Technical specialists prepared evidence packages for simultaneous release, while security personnel enhanced protection measures around their facility. Hayes coordinated with external contacts, ensuring reception channels were prepared for immediate verification and distribution. Reed gathered his team for tactical briefing, knowing they needed to be prepared for potential direct engagement if the facility's security was compromised before the evidence release protocol completed. "Standard defensive positions," he instructed. "Non-lethal engagement protocols where possible. Remember, conventional operators may be deployed against us without understanding the actual situation. Our priority is evidence protection and witness survival until release confirmation." As the operation accelerated toward its culmination, Fletcher received communication that changed their strategic position entirely. "Keller's talking," he announced, returning from the secure communications room. "Not just confirmation of what we already documented, names, dates, operational codes, financial transfers. He's providing the entire network structure." Reed understood the significance immediately. Keller had calculated his survival odds and determined that comprehensive cooperation represented his best option, a professional assessment of changed realities rather than moral conversion. "How high does it go?" Hayes asked the question they all considered. "Admiral William Harrington," Fletcher replied, naming the deputy commander of the Fifth Fleet, plus 6 other flag officers across service branches, 3 senior intelligence directors and executives from 7 private military contractors, including Titan Industries' entire senior leadership. The scope confirmed their worst assessments: systematic corruption integrated throughout military and intelligence command structures directing operational assets for private profit rather than national security. "Keller's testimony has been secured through multiple deposition protocols," Fletcher continued. "Copies transmitted to secured verification systems. The authentication codes confirm his access levels and operational authority, corroborating everything your team documented in Jordan." With the addition of Keller's comprehensive testimony, the evidence package achieved a level of verification that would resist even the most sophisticated containment efforts. Fletcher gave the final authorization, and the release protocol activated simultaneous transmission to congressional oversight committees, military justice systems, validated media contacts, and international oversight organizations. Evidence release initiated. The technical team confirmed. Initial verification acknowledgments already returning through secured channels. Congressional recipients confirming protection protocols for the material. A sense of culmination spread through the operations center, the moment when years of monitoring, documentation, and careful preparation finally materialized into action that couldn't be contained or reversed. Whatever happened next, the truth they had fought to expose was now beyond the network's ability to suppress. Fletcher approached Reed, his weathered face showing the first genuine smile since their operation began. 30 minutes until the evidence reaches public channels. Once that happens, their containment options collapse entirely. Direct action against witnesses becomes counterproductive. Elimination would only confirm the evidence's authenticity. Reed nodded, understanding the strategic inflection point they had reached. And their response, already beginning, Hayes reported from the monitoring station. Unusual communication patterns across multiple command channels. They're trying to assess the extent of exposure and contain damage through classification barriers. Which won't work, Fletcher added with grim satisfaction. The release protocol bypasses classification systems by simultaneously exposing the evidence through channels they don't control. The moment multiple congressional committees and vetted journalists have the same authenticated documentation, traditional suppression methods become ineffective. The next hours unfolded in a cascade of responses across military intelligence and political systems, as the evidence of systematic corruption spread through institutional channels designed to resist exactly this kind of exposure. Initial reaction followed predictable patterns: classification attempts, discreditation efforts, questioning of authentication protocols, but the comprehensive nature of the evidence package overwhelmed conventional containment responses. Fletcher's secured communication system brought updates as the exposure expanded. Congressional oversight committees initiated emergency sessions. Military justice advocates filed formal proceedings against identified conspirators. Journalists with national security credentials began publishing carefully verified accounts of the corruption network and its operational methods. First arrests being reported, Hayes announced monitoring secure channels. Military police at the Pentagon have detained Admiral Harrington. FBI counterintelligence teams are executing warrants at Titan Industries headquarters. 2 additional flag officers taken into custody at Central Command. The systematic response reflected the evidence's irrefutable nature, too comprehensive, too well-documented, and too widely distributed to be contained through conventional means. The network that had operated with impunity for years suddenly found itself exposed across too many fronts, simultaneously its institutional protection collapsing under coordinated pressure. As the operation reached its conclusion, Reed found himself on the secure facility's roof, with Fletcher and Hayes watching the sun set over Amman's sprawling landscape. The moment carried the weight of completion, but also the sobering recognition of what would follow: years of investigations, prosecutions, and institutional reformation. What happens now? Reed asked the question, encompassing their personal futures as well as the broader implications of what they'd exposed. Formal testimony through secured channels, Fletcher replied. Your team's first-hand accounts provide the human context that connects documentary evidence to operational reality. Congress has already authorized special protection protocols for witnesses in the investigation. And afterward, Reed pressed, knowing their military careers as conventionally understood had ended the moment they chose to expose corruption within the system they had served. That depends on how deep the institutional reformation goes, Fletcher acknowledged. Best case scenario, the investigation creates fundamental changes in oversight and accountability, recognizing that the domestic enemies mentioned in your oath sometimes wear the same uniform you do. Hayes's expression reflected professional assessment rather than optimism. More likely, the investigation identifies bad actors while preserving institutional structures. The system protects itself even while sacrificing individual components. Either way, Fletcher added, your team has options. My network includes private organizations that value integrity above institutional affiliation. There are ways to continue serving your country's actual interests outside conventional structures. Reed considered this, recognizing both the closure of one chapter and the potential opening of another. And you, Hayes, after 3 years underground, what comes next? A complex emotion flickered across her face, something between weariness and resolve. Continuation. There will be elements of the network that escape immediate exposure operations, still compromised teams, still at risk. The work doesn't end with one successful exposure. Fletcher nodded in understanding. The Guardian continues guarding, even when those being protected don't know they need protection. As darkness settled over the city, Reed reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the ambush in Syria to the conspiracy exposed through their combined efforts. The path had cost them their conventional careers and would reshape their lives in ways still unfolding, but the alternative would have betrayed everything their service had meant. Worth it. Reed said simply, the statement requiring no elaboration between people who shared the same fundamental understanding of their oath's meaning. Always, Hayes agreed. 8 months later, Reed sat in a secured congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., providing formal testimony about the conspiracy they had exposed. The investigation had expanded far beyond their initial evidence, revealing systematic corruption that spanned multiple administrations and military commands. Admiral William Harrington and 6 other flag officers faced court-martial proceedings for treason, conspiracy, and violations of military law. Titan Industries CEO Richard Keller had turned state's evidence, providing comprehensive documentation that implicated dozens of officials in weapons transfers that had destabilized multiple regions for corporate profit. 17 private military contractors faced criminal charges, their government contracts suspended, pending investigation outcomes. Reed's testimony focused on the operational reality of compromised missions, the human cost of tactical betrayal, the deliberate sacrifice of American forces for private profit, the systematic corruption of command structures designed to protect those who served. The ultimate betrayal wasn't the ambush itself, he explained to the congressional committee. It was the realization that the systems we trusted to protect us had been weaponized against us by those seeking profit rather than national security. After his testimony concluded, Reed found Fletcher waiting in a secure anteroom. The older man's appearance unchanged, despite the tumultuous months since Jordan. At 70, Fletcher remained the embodiment of a generation that had faced different enemies but recognized the same fundamental threats to American principles. Your testimony was compelling, Fletcher observed, particularly the connection between tactical betrayal and strategic corruption. The committee members understand the human dimension now, not just the documentary evidence. Reed nodded in acknowledgement. Any word on Hayes? Fletcher's expression remained carefully neutral. Operating in Eastern Europe, monitoring potential network extensions in that region. Some patterns suggesting similar corruption within NATO command structures. Still the Guardian, Reed observed. Some missions never truly end, Fletcher replied. Not while the threat remains. They walked together through the secured corridors of the Capitol complex, their conversation turning to the broader implications of what they had exposed. The investigation had revealed corruption more extensive than even Fletcher had suspected, compromised operations spanning 15 years, hundreds of American casualties resulting from deliberately exposed deployments, billions in defense contracts generated through manufactured conflicts. The reformations are beginning, Fletcher noted as they reached the building's exit. New oversight protocols for special operations deployments, independent verification requirements for intelligence supporting tactical operations, protection systems for internal whistleblowers identifying potential compromise. Will it be enough? Reed asked the question, reflecting his evolved understanding of institutional limitations. Fletcher considered this with the weighted perspective of his decades in service. It will help. Systems can be improved even if they can never be perfected. The key is ensuring that people within those systems understand that loyalty to principles sometimes requires questioning the institutions that claim to embody them. Outside the Capitol, in the spring sunlight of a Washington morning, Fletcher handed Reed a small envelope. From Hayes, arrived through secured channels yesterday. Inside was a simple note and a digital storage device. The note read, "When you're ready." The work continues in different forms. Some Guardians operate in shadows. Others build systems that require fewer shadows to begin with. The digital device contained information about Fletcher's Foundation, an organization dedicated to institutional accountability in military and intelligence operations, staffed by veterans who understood both the necessity of special operations and the critical importance of ethical oversight. "She thinks you might be interested in a different kind of service," Fletcher explained, "building systems that protect operators from the inside rather than requiring intervention from the outside." Reed considered the offer, recognizing its alignment with everything he had come to understand about institutional integrity and individual responsibility. Teaching others to recognize compromise before it becomes deadly. "Exactly," Fletcher confirmed, continuing the oath in its truest form, protecting those who serve from enemies both foreign and domestic. 2 years later, Reed stood before a class of officers at the newly established Accountability and Oversight Training Center, a facility created through congressional mandate following the exposure of the Harrington Network. The center's mission, teaching military leaders to recognize and respond to potential compromise within their own command structures, represented institutional acknowledgement that the domestic enemies mentioned in their oath sometimes operated within the very systems they served. The most dangerous threat isn't always the one firing at you from identified enemy positions, Reed explained to the attentive officers. Sometimes it's the compromise that happens before you ever reach the battlefield. The manipulation of mission parameters, intelligence filtering, and command decisions that place American forces at unnecessary risk for purposes that have nothing to do with national security. The training center had become Fletcher's legacy, his decades of experience and Hayes's operational insights combined into systematic education for a new generation of military leaders. The curriculum integrated tactical awareness with institutional accountability, teaching officers to fulfill their oath's complete meaning rather than its convenient interpretation. After the day's final session, Reed found a package waiting in his office, a simple envelope with no return address or identifying marks. Inside was a newspaper clipping reporting the conviction of 3 former Titan Industries executives for conspiracy and illegal weapons transfers, along with a handwritten note. "The work continues. Some shadows are necessary while the light grows stronger. Watch the eastern approaches." H. Reed smiled slightly at the characteristically cryptic message, understanding its meaning without requiring elaboration. Hayes remained the Guardian, operating beyond institutional boundaries, protecting those who wouldn't know her name or recognize her intervention until moments of crisis revealed her presence. Their paths had diverged after Jordan Reed, working to reform the institutions from within Hayes, continuing her solitary mission beyond official recognition, but the purpose remained fundamentally unified. Different approaches serving the same essential commitment, ensuring that those who served in America's defense were not betrayed by the systems created to support them. Later that evening, Reed stood at the Memorial Bridge overlooking the Potomac, the meeting location specified in his response to Hayes's message. He had no certainty she would appear, knowing her operational security protocols might prevent direct contact, but he had learned that Hayes operated according to her own assessment rather than conventional expectations. The Eastern approach's reference was subtle. Her voice came from behind him, the approach so silent he hadn't detected her arrival despite his trained awareness. Nicely constructed response. Reed turned to find Hayes standing a few feet away. Her appearance changed from their last meeting, different hair, subtle alterations to her facial structure suggesting advanced disguise techniques, but the same focused intensity in her eyes. Subtle was necessary, Reed acknowledged. Your operational security requirements haven't changed, I assume. If anything, they've intensified, Hayes confirmed. The primary network has been dismantled, but elements escaped the initial exposure. They're rebuilding under different structures, particularly in Eastern Europe, and certain Middle Eastern commands. Reed nodded, unsurprised by the assessment. Institutional corruption rarely yielded completely to single exposure, however comprehensive. Fletcher's health is declining. He doesn't say it directly, but the signs are there. I know. Hayes acknowledged genuine emotion briefly visible beneath her operational persona. His generation is passing. The Guardians who understood from the beginning that systems require constant vigilance, not just against external threats, but internal corruption. His legacy continues through the training center, Reed noted. 300 officers trained so far with expanded programs starting next quarter. The institutional knowledge won't die with him. Hayes studied him with professional assessment. And you've found your place in that legacy, building the systems that might eventually make my role unnecessary. That's the hope, Reed agreed. Though I suspect there will always be need for Guardians operating beyond institutional boundaries. Some shadows don't disappear simply because we build better lights. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the lights of Washington reflected in the Potomac's dark waters. The city represented both the ideals they had sworn to protect and the institutional complexities that sometimes betrayed those ideals, the eternal tension between principle and power that defined American governance. I'm leaving for Europe next week, Hayes said finally. Patterns suggesting network reformation through privatized intelligence operations with military contracts. Similar structure to what we exposed, but with improved concealment protocols. Reed recognized the information sharing for what it was, professional courtesy rather than operational necessity. Be careful. They know what you look like now, at least in general terms. Vite. A ghost of a smile crossed Hayes's face. They think they do. Appearance is the easiest thing to change. Principles are what remain constant. With that observation hanging between them, Hayes turned to leave her movement carrying the same fluid efficiency that had allowed her to eliminate 40 enemy combatants in Syria without detection. Before she disappeared into the Washington night, she looked back once. The oath doesn't expire, Captain, not with discharge papers changing administrations or institutional priorities. It binds us to principles rather than people or organizations. Remember that when the systems you're building face their inevitable tests. Reed watched her vanish into the urban landscape, the Guardian returning to her self-appointed mission beyond official recognition or institutional support. Their paths had diverged, but remained fundamentally aligned. Different approaches to the same essential commitment they had each made when first swearing to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The Guardian would continue her solitary vigil in the shadows, Reed would build systems that required fewer shadows to function properly. And somewhere between their approaches, American principles would find their defense against threats that came not just from identified adversaries, but from the corruption that sometimes festered within the very institutions created to embody those principles. The oath remained constant, even as those who upheld it adapted to evolving threats. Some guardians operated beyond recognition, others within reformed systems, but their shared purpose transcended method or position, ensuring that those who served their country would never stand alone when shadows gathered, whether from foreign shores or domestic corridors of power.